House do now adjourn. Mr. George Freeman.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And in the immortal words of my whip each evening, can I ask colleagues, please, to stay for the adjournment? Mr. Speaker, it's a great privilege to be able to rise in this House and speak on behalf of our constituents. And for me tonight, no less a privilege because I'm speaking for one of my smaller villages, the village of Necton, which until tonight was famous for being mentioned in the Domesday Book, where it appears as Nekatuna, the name meaning town or settlement by neck of land, for All Saints Church in the benefice of Necton, and for a magnificent 14th century Grade II listed tomb reputed to be that of the Countess of Warwick. But as of this year, Mr. Deputy Speaker, Necton becomes famous for something else. It becomes the home of the world's largest concentration of substation infrastructure for the transmission of offshore generated electricity to connect to the grid. And I want tonight, Mr. Deputy Speaker, to use the privilege of being able to speak for Necton in the House to raise some important issues about the lack of proper strategic planning infrastructure to deal with the bringing on shore of that necessary infrastructure for connection. And it links to the earlier debate in this way. The slogan that has fueled the Brexit revolution was to take back control. For what, Mr. Deputy Speaker? Have we taken back control to be overrun by unaccountable quangos, or to take control on behalf of the people that we're here to serve? And I think I've got my first intervention.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, first of all, congratulate the honourable gentleman on bringing this forward. Does the honourable member not agree that the tidal energy is not being used to its full potential, and the power that the tidal turbines can bring, in my constituency of Strangford, and Strangford Lough in particular, prove beyond doubt that substantial energy could be harnessed and converted, and that further consideration should be given to perfecting the offshore renewable energy source we have in our constituency? We think we could do more with it, the same as he has as well.
Yeah. Well, the honourable gentleman makes an excellent point, and had I been in charge of energy policy at the time, I would have doubled the nuclear capacity when we could have got them cheap, and invested more in the long-term research of a whole range of renewables, including tidal. But we are where we are, and tonight my constituency faces an enormous challenge of hosting this national infrastructure. And I want to start, Mr. Deputy Speaker, by making clear that I am a strong supporter of renewable energy, and indeed, if the wind is to be used, then I'd rather it was used offshore than on. And the investment in offshore wind in our part of the world, in East Anglia, is phenomenal, and it'll generate a large number of jobs. But much more importantly, it will reduce our dependence on fossil fuels, dramatically accelerate our work on climate change, lessen our dependence on energy from Russia and the Middle East, and is generally a very good thing. So I don't want anything I say tonight to be taken in any way against the offshore wind generation revolution. Indeed, East Anglia is now the global hub of offshore renewable energy, and many of the points I'm raising tonight reflect and impact Norfolk as well as Suffolk. And I'm delighted tonight to be joined by the honourable member for Lowestoft and to have the support of the member for Suffolk Coastal and Norwich North, the member for Suffolk Coastal here on the bench, muted by virtue of her high office, but present and supportive as ever, with a thumbs up for the camera. And Mr. Speaker, the question I really want to raise tonight, Mr. Speaker, there are three. Firstly, what are the strategic options that haven't really been debated properly in Norfolk or Suffolk or East Anglia, and has the government looked or required the relevant agencies, in this case National Grid, to look properly at what those options are and done a proper assessment, cost benefit and environmental impact assessment? Secondly, what are the guidance, the provisions to make sure that where a small community like Necton is host for national infrastructure of the scale that we're talking about? And Mr. Deputy Speaker, when I say substation, you may, like me, have thought that we're talking about something the size of a container that sort of hums in the rain behind a hedge. This is the size of Wembley Stadium, and I'm having two of them outside one village. And thirdly, Mr. Deputy Speaker, I wanted to ask, what is it that a community being asked to carry that infrastructure should expect by way of both consultation, proper consultation, and community benefit? And I give way to my honourable friend, the member for Lowestoft.
I'm grateful to my honourable friend for giving way on that point. The just the offshore wind sector deal, which was launched by my right honourable friend the Minister in Lowestoft and Yarmouth last Thursday, provides for government and industry to work together to maximise the benefits of offshore wind to the UK and regions such as East Anglia. The sector deal makes specific reference for the need to ensure that the impact of onshore transmission is acceptable to local communities like Necton. And would you agree with me that this provides the framework for government, the industry, the National Grid, the Crown Estates, councils and MPs to work together to put in place a sustainable solution to the problems that he has quite rightly highlighted?
Well, I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for that excellent point, and it's one that I hope the Minister will pick up, as I'm sure she will in her closing comments. He points to something very important. And, Mr Deputy Speaker, the key question that's being asked in our part of the world is, if we are to host this incredible investment, up to 50 billion of investment already in the pipeline, I have 2 wind farms connecting through my constituency. There are 10 coming. What voice should the people of Norfolk, should their elected representatives have in shaping the way in which that infrastructure is connected? Because at the moment, it looks very much as though it's a free-for-all. Each wind farm applies for its own cabling, its own substation, with the result that we waste energy, waste huge amounts of land, massively increase the environmental impact, and leave Norfolk powered by renewable energy, but disempowered when it comes to the democracy of those decisions, and without any benefit. And it's beginning to feel in our part of the world, and I say this as someone who's supportive of renewable energy, as though the applicants are using the national significant infrastructure planning regulations to bypass and circumvent the need to have any meaningful conversation at all, which I think indicates and explains why I've had such support from other colleagues in the area. Mr Deputy Speaker, taking an interest in this and having been a PPS in the department, I was quite surprised when the first I heard about the scale of the infrastructure coming was in my role as a constituency MP when confronted by the application for the Dudgeon wind farm. And the proposal at the time was to put it close to Necton. I didn't have a problem with that particularly, but the siting I did have a problem with. It was on top of a hill in an area of natural beauty, in an area with environmental protections, in an area that anyone who'd actually been there would have told you was a daft place to put a substation. And with the active cooperation of the then applicant company, we sat down over a table and spoke to the parish councils and were able to agree that it should be put in the low-lying land down next to the village of Necton. And so then, a few years later, in 2013, it became clear that the Vanguard and then the Boreas wind farm applications were coming, and that they too would need another substation. My first surprise, I felt that the first substation we were having would be big enough for all of these wind farms. It turns out each is going to have one. And through a process of consultation, which I have to say, led by Vattenfall, has led to increasing levels of concern, not just from me, but from the local community, that for all the consultation phases, nobody's actually listening to the voice of the people on the ground. We've ended up with this enormous structure placed on top of a hill, visible now to 5 villages, raising all sorts of environmental impacts, light pollution, as well as impact on the landscape, in the teeth of a howl from the local community that they don't mind having the substation, but could it not be put in the low-lying land, out of sight, and down next to the previous substation? You couldn't, Mr Deputy Speaker, have made it up. And what's been shocking in this process is the absolute lack of interest from the applicant in the voice of local community representatives, from parish council to councillors to the MP. And the reason for that is, it would appear that under the nationally significant infrastructure planning rules, they have been led to believe that they are able to circumvent that local representation. Secondly, the more one looks into the process by which we've ended up here, the more clear it's become that seemingly there has been no proper consideration of the strategic options for bringing this scale of energy offshore. And indeed, a number of people in both Norfolk and Suffolk have suggested at various points, wouldn't it be rather more efficient to have an offshore ring main to collect the electricity offshore and then bring it onshore at 1 or 2 points with a major substation, instead of requiring each individual wind farm to have their own cabling and substation? A very sensible proposal, you might think, Mr Deputy Speaker. I see you nodding, which is an encouraging sign. Neutral, though I know you are. And the point is, at no point in the last 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years has there been a strategic discussion in Norfolk, or indeed in Suffolk, in which the elected representatives at council or parliamentary level can contribute to it. And what appears to have happened is that National Grid have merrily gone through the national planning process and responded to applications, and we're in danger of creating a situation where there is hugely unnecessary levels of cabling, hugely unnecessary levels of substation infrastructure, all of which, of course, are very high security installations that actually represent something of an energy security challenge to the UK in these dangerous times. And just to illustrate the point, the 2 wind farms alone that are coming into my constituency are responsible for 2,500 acres of land over which the cabling is running, and 115 kilometres of cabling. And reasonably sophisticated local projections have shown that if, even on those 2, you were to unify the cabling, you could reduce it by 80 kilometres. But there seems to be no basis on which this conversation can be had. So I wanted, secondly, to ask the Minister what consideration has been made, and if not, should be made, to look at those options, and in particular, of course, the cost benefit, but also the environmental implications, which I know she, as a very passionate campaigner and activist and minister in this House, will take and does take very seriously. And thirdly, I wanted to ask, in the event that little villages like Necton end up carrying major substation infrastructure like this, and hopefully in the right place, right site, rather than in the wrong site, what benefit should a community like that expect? It's always seemed to me fair that if a village should take, for example, a wind pylon, then it should benefit in a small way locally. Where it takes a massive piece of national infrastructure, perhaps the benefit might be proportionate. The people of Necton, I put it to the Minister, would be happy if in some way something flowed back into the village by way of some community facility. Given the scale of infrastructure, some transport upgrade on the very dangerous junction with the A47. Now, normally one would be able to, indeed I would, relish sitting down with the applicant and trying to broker something sensible. But the way the regulations appear to have been drafted, there is no conversation to be had, which seems wrong. Mr Deputy Speaker, it's late at night, and I think I've made my points and will invite the Minister to reply. But I simply close by saying this. It shouldn't be an excuse for the applicant to be able to plead that because it's national infrastructure, understandably bypassing the minutiae and the eddies and currents of the local planning system, because it's national infrastructure, that somehow the voice of the local community and elected representatives should be cut out. That's important, not just for Necton, not just for Mid-Norfolk, but actually it's important for trust in our planning system and for a sense in our part of the world that this energy revolution will work for the benefit of everybody, whereas at the moment it looks horribly like it's going to be to the benefit of a few energy companies and very few people in our part of the world. And I very much welcome the Minister's interest in this offline, as well as her comments now to the House.
Minister Clare Packer.
Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker. Well